Shalom, WJC family. It is time for our weekly Torah Talk. And this week in Shul, we will be reading Parshat Bo as we move along in the Exodus story. In Bo, we read the last 3 plagues, followed by some laws about the Pesach offering, and the Jews finally leaving Goshen, leaving the place where they live in Egypt. A question that comes up on Bo again and again is the question of free will. In fact, a commentator can't talk in Judaism, it seems, about free will without wondering what's going on here with Pharaoh. Famously, God comes and he hardens Pharaoh's heart. Right? Moses comes, says there's going to be a plague. The plague comes. Pharaoh relents, says, go, just go. And Moses says, okay. The plague goes away. And it says, at first, for the first 5 plagues, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. For the next 5 plagues, that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. The 6th plague, it's a little hard to tell. Maybe both happen. The question is, if God is hardening Pharaoh's heart, where's his opportunity to do tshuva? What's the point of all these terrible plagues if he can't actually get better? So this is a question of free will, and different commentators have different ideas about it. Saadia Gaon, who I've been studying lately, famously talks about habit, that Pharaoh hardens his own heart 5 times. After that, God knew that there was no chance he was going to relent, and so the next 5 times are part of his punishment. Right? That those are setups for God to pay back for all the evil he had done to the Jewish people and his inability to repent. I want to take that idea and take it even a little bit farther. There's this idea that a leader can be referred to by whatever it is that they lead. I remember when I was a rabbi in Norfolk, I was getting on an aircraft carrier with Admiral Herm Shalansky, actually a couple of times. The first time, he was the commanding officer of Strike Group 10. When we stepped onto the aircraft carrier, they said, Strike Group 10 has boarded. Now, Strike Group 10 consisted of an aircraft carrier, several destroyers, a couple of submarines, a bunch of supply frigates. Obviously, they had not all boarded this aircraft carrier. But Admiral Shalansky, as the commander of the strike group, was whistled on with that title, called by what he was leading. This happened again a few years later when he was Inspector General of the Navy. He said, Inspector General's office has boarded. Of course, the office didn't board, just the Inspector General. I believe this appears even in Shakespeare's Hamlet, where it says Denmark approaches. It's not Denmark approaching, it's the Thane of Denmark, it's Hamlet. So this is an idea that goes back quite a ways, and we can do the same thing with Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't just rule Mitzrayim. Pharaoh is Mitzrayim. So what is Mitzrayim? What does Mitzrayim mean? Mitzrayim, the name, is derived from the word tsar, meaning narrow. Anyone who knows the song, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od, the whole world is a very narrow bridge. Tsar is narrow. So Mitzrayim is the narrow place, and we assume often that it's called that because it was a narrow place for the Jews, right? That is the place where the Jews were squeezed, right? Their freedom was taken away. It was as if they were in a very narrow place. But I think actually it's more likely that Mitzrayim is called narrow because of its leader, because of how narrow a place it is for the Egyptians themselves. So why would we call it narrow? Pharaoh's the king. He can do whatever he wants. Perhaps, but he over time has created for himself his own prison, his own Mitzrayim, his own narrow space, and it's getting smaller and smaller as we read through last week's Parsha with the first 7 plagues and this week's Parshat Bo. How is he creating this narrow space? Just like Saadia Gaon says, he's created a habit of painting himself into a corner. He's so concerned about power, about appearances. He's so concerned about the strength or the apparent strength of Egypt over this slave people that he fails to see what is actually good or bad for his people. He fails to recognize the strength of God, the strength of Moshe, and the value of each and every person, even the Hebrew slaves who they have been demeaning for hundreds of years. Pharaoh has created his Mitzrayim, his very narrow place. And the question I want to ask today is, what narrow places have we created for ourselves? Have we locked ourselves in our own Mitzrayim? 2 years ago at Passover time, we were talking about this new Mitzrayim we were experiencing, a pandemic that would leave us trapped in our own narrow spaces, trapped in our houses. And here we are 2 years later, still struggling with this pandemic. But I think we've learned that you can be stuck in your house and live a very broad life of connections through technology, through the life of the mind, through making the best of situations, learning to meet outside instead of inside, all these ways to adapt and break out of that Mitzrayim. And we can have all the freedom in the world, and some of us are locked in a little tiny cage, unable to step outside of our regular habits, unable to step outside of maybe views that we hold that hold us back. We each have our own Mitzrayim, not because of the pandemic, because of us. And it's just like Pharaoh, it can happen to anyone. It's human nature to make our own Mitzrayim. Rav Eliyahu Dessler, as quoted by Alan Marinas in his book Everyday Holiness, talks about this idea. He says there are certain moments in our lives when we make a choice. He calls them bechira points, choice points. But he points out that they're very few and far between, that most of the things we do in our lives, we do out of habit, right? We do unthinkingly. Someone does something to us and we react, so we're angry or generously, or just the way we've reacted all the times before without thinking. Is this the best way to react? Is this what I should do? Maybe I should slow down. Maybe I should actually make a choice here. He talks about Bechira points. He doesn't talk about it exactly this way. I like to think of it almost like a football field, right? But the whole battle, the football field is all important, but the whole battle of what choices we're making only take up 10% of the field. How much more free will would we have if we pushed to make it 15, 20, 25, 30 yards of the field, where we actually had choices, where we were actually making decisions instead of just reacting out of habit or the way we always have? In many ways, we have put ourselves in our own Mitzrayim. We're no better than the original Mitzrayim, Pharaoh. So how do we take that free will back? How do we capture our own destiny? How do we make sure that we are taking advantage and inserting more bechira points into our everyday, more moments when we are actually acting mindfully, consciously the way we want to, instead of just reacting the way we always have, or the way our emotions push us, or the way our habits have been formed? Well, the answer to that question is, in fact, the work of a lifetime. That's what Musar practice is all about. It's what a lot of Jewish practice is all about. But I want to share one technique that I've come to really love over the last few years. It's a technique that I first discovered when I read the book Einstein and the Rabbi by Rabbi Naomi Levy, a beautiful book, certainly worth your time. In it, she talks about a meditation mantra that she uses, a breathing exercise, if you will. And I found that doing this breathing exercise, even just a minute or two a day, makes a big difference. The way it works, it's based on a verse in the Psalms. You may be familiar with it. Min ha-metzar karati ya, anani ba merchavya. Min ha-metzar, from metzar, like Mitzrayim means the narrow place. Karati, I call out to Yah, God. Anani, God answers me. Ba merchav Yah, from God's merchav, wideness. That's not how that verse is usually translated, but it works, right? From my Meitzar is usually translated like tsar is also tsuris, right? Like from my discontent, from my upsetness, I called out to you, O God. Anani ba merchavya. The merchavya is like the vast greatness, the firmament, but means the wide space. So how does this breathing exercise work? As I breathe out, I think to myself, Min ha-metzar karatia, from my narrow place, from this selfish, closed off place, I'm breathing out, calling to you, God. And as I breathe in the world around me and try and take in the energy and understand the power and the energy and the godliness, the divinity, the holiness in the whole world around me, I breathe in Anani Bamerchavya. You're answering me, God, from the vastness, from the openness. You're freeing me from my Metzar, from my own Mitzrayim, the Mitzrayim of my own making, my small-mindedness, my closed offness, my unwillingness to listen to others, the trap I've made of my own habits, of my emotional reactions, of my impatience, of my discontent. All of that I'm breathing out to you, God. And as I breathe back in, I realize I let all that wash away, and I start to take in the vastness of everything, the interconnectedness of everything, the fact that I don't have to be a slave to my habits, the way Pharaoh, ironically, was a slave to his own. We do have the opportunity for tshuva, the opportunity to change, to take back free will, to create more bechira points. And as good a place to start as any is in that deep understanding of ourselves from that breathing exercise. Min ha-metzar karatiya, anani bamerchavya. From my own narrow place, my own Mitzrayim, I call out to you, God. You answer me from broadness, from vastness. May we all find our way to that broadness, to the freedom to enter the world in all the ways from which we are closed off, to learn, to grow, to be honest and true in relationships, all the things that are impossible when we're locked in a narrow space. That is truly the kind of Exodus we're looking for as we read this culmination of the Exodus in Parshat Bo this week and next week at the Red Sea in Parshat Beshalach. Shabbat Shalom.